Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Bruce.
And I'm your host, Pete.
And we are the Epic Experiment.
If you're new to the show, we talk about Magic the Gathering with a focus on playtesting cards in Commander. So, look at your bulk, folks, and if you really, really like the cards, we might have them featured on our show. If you want to reach out to us, check the show notes for our contact info.
On the show! Yeah!
Yeah, so we've been going at this for a while, and just for some context, we wanted to change up our format because we've had some creative sort of blocks, and we figured it would be easier for us to just streamline what we really want to do, which is really focus on the analytics of the game and just cards that we've kind of dug through over the years that we think are good, bad, or ugly. So that's basically what we're going to be doing tonight or today. And Bruce, it's garbage or great, but it's garbage or great to the max. That's what we're doing.
This is the stuff I think you and I are most passionate about when we sit down and chit chat Magic. So like let's do what we do best. So
let's go.
All right, let's get going. All right, we got a bunch of cards. Let's chat them, find out if they're any darn good.
What do you got for us?
First one tonight is a common. I always go and find something new, right? And this is something that always sort of gets my brain tickled and juiced up about something interesting. So I got Insidious Fungus, which is kind of a neat card from Duskworn. And it's a single green for a 1/2 fungus. And it's got not a lot of text in terms of like trample or haste or anything like that, but it's got some interesting abilities. So pay 2, sacrifice Insidious Fungus, and then you can choose one. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, which we've both seen as effects on cards before, which is not stimulating. The last one, though, is kind of neat. Draw a card, then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped.
So to be real with you, so I've seen this a lot when the draft format came out, and a lot of pro players would block with this thing, sacrifice it at instant speed, draw a card, put a land out, or even on turn 2, they would just do it so that they could ramp a bit quicker. Even if they were losing that body on the field, they still were able to ramp. The fact that it can be done at any time is fantastic, and it's a 1/2. So, like, in my eyes, it's definitely something that I would consider playing in any sort of aristocrat-style deck. Any sort of, like, Golgari mid-range sort of slog. And all 3 modes in this day and age are super duper relevant for a lot of the format where what we're seeing with more enchantments being played in general, more creatures that are double, that are artifacts or enchantments as well as creatures. So we're seeing a lot of that. It hits a lot of targets, a lot. I'm surprised. I'm sure in maybe even in CDH they might be playing this against some of the stacks pieces. It gets around so much stuff. I'm very impressed by how efficient it is as a card.
Yeah, it really isn't really a very efficient card. And so this is like similar to Caustic Caterpillar, which was like the precursor to this long ago, and was a good card. And over the time we've power crept Caustic Caterpillar essentially out of the format. And so now it's got to come in with a second toughness, which is good because it's less likely to die to things like Bowmasters, which is running around everywhere. And add in the fact that it can, like, that extra mode of putting a land into play and pulling you further ahead on resources is actually really, really big. So, now, like, the only issue I can take issue with this one is the fact that it's the creature type, and that people often look to play this in like green decks that may be typal in nature, whether it's like usually like fungus or saplings, but like the sapling commanders don't care about fungus. They care about things that are type saplings. So it kind of is a bit of a nombo there, but I think it just makes up for it on rate for being a good value creature that is just going to do stuff.
There's so many ways to recur creatures now. Like, it's so easy to recur this thing. Even if you're playing a deck that's aggressive, like, not that you'd stick it into a Gruul deck per se, but you could, if you don't, like, if you really don't want to fill a slot with like a Croson Grip this creature is just better in my opinion than that.
Oh, it
Because
is for sure.
every single like time you play that card, it's not a dead card in your hand. And I guess its versatility, like you could throw it in like any combination, any color combination, and it'll do something. Its creature
Hmm.
type, I don't really care for, but yeah, it's just a card that probably will see a lot more play in the next few years.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
and
it's tasting cheap now, and it's readily available because everybody's just finished opening all their Duskmourn. I've put it in my Gimli, a Mournful Avenger deck,
okay,
which looks to have things that other creatures that will sacrifice themselves. And so the fact that I don't need an altar or a sack outlet, it will do it itself, is really really potent in that deck.
yeah.
So I think
Also,
that one is good.
they're nerfing a lot of like sacrifice effects where it's like when a
Yeah.
non-token creature dies, so it actually triggers a lot more things because there's definitely I'm looking at a card right now actually that says whenever something is sacrificed, make a 1/1 insect with flying. It was from Foundations, but basically there's just a lot of
There's a
really like
couple.
neat
There's a couple.
application.
There's a couple of really good ones. There's Spinner of Souls from Foundations 2. That's kind of like plays evolutionary leap when
Right.
non-token creatures get sacrificed too. So yeah, there's a lot of really good payoffs now, but they are being more particular about non-token sacrifice
It
things.
it
So
reminds me of like when Maryland was running around when it first came out, and everybody was playing the experience counter Golgari deck, where it's
Marin,
just
yeah.
like they would just keep Marin, yeah, they would just keep like recycling this card. Like this card
Well,
like literally replaces a bunch of those cards that they used to play
yeah.
pretty efficiently. So yeah. Anyway, the next card that I have is a common from a much older set. So it's an uncommon as well, actually. Sorry. Faith Shield. It's 1 white. Okay. It's an instant. Target permanent you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, and then it has Fateful Hour. If you have 5 or less life, instead you and each permanent you control gain protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. From Dark Ascension. What
I
do you
remember
think?
this card. I remember this card.
Right.
I like the first half of it where a very inexpensive way to give something protection. And protection's kind of a tricky way of making sure something doesn't die. So lots of times these sorts of effects are now on indestructible or hexproof, not on the fact that it's protection from a color. So that's kind of a neat wrinkle and sort of because it does in some ways it acts as a benefit compared to other cards. In other ways, it's a bit of a drawback at times. Case in point, like if you have a card that is wearing an enchantment or of that particular color you need protection from, the moment you give it protection, the enchantment would fall off, which is kind of a downer. But it also means that your creature can then be used to block and just absorb all the damage from an incoming target of that color because that's how protection works. It reduces the damage to 0. So there are pros and cons to it. So I like that, and it's so inexpensive. I think the second line attack or second clause there, the Fateful Hour stuff, even in Dark Ascension Limited, it was essentially non-functional. It was not a
Sure.
useful line of text, and it still isn't now.
You don't
So
think so?
I don't think it is. I don't think
Okay.
if it, that wouldn't be why I'm looking to try and run this card. If it's this or God's Willing, I guess it's potentially like it is an upside comparatively, but I have no great love for like this Fateful Hour clause because I don't think it actually makes a lot of sense to try and make use of it regularly. So in 99.7% of cases, you're going to play it for the 1 mana protect your thing. And periodically, the other 0.3%, you're going to get it for maybe it was going to be relevant. But
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's my personal read on the card. And so if we're looking for that effect, that effect exists in a bunch of different sets and in a bunch of different ways. This one's good in the sense that it is so cheap because there are some sets it's 1 and a white instead of just a single white. So I like the fact that it's as cheap as it is. I just think that second clause is not overly relevant.
I think that a sneaky way to swing the game in your favor. I think that it could impact you like in a game with specific decks that are dealing a ton of damage to each player at the same time. And maybe like you're playing against that group slug deck, and you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to be the last person to survive. I think as an
Yeah.
aggro list, you could slot this in as a way to counterpunch your opponent. Like if you're hitting them and they're hitting you really bad, and you're trying to come back. Um, like if you're playing a control list and they're just bullying
Yeah.
you, like you could use it as a way to leverage and swing the tide back into your favor. I like that it targets anything. Like it doesn't
True.
just
That's
limit,
good. Yeah.
because there are not a lot of cards now in general, and a lot of protection spells in white, because white really is the only color that has a protection clause. Um, like in terms of that, they're the
Yeah.
ones giving, an artifact or a creature a sort of like hexproof effect. Um, I think, and then green, of course, has heroic intervention, but I mean more so like white as a color. If you're trying to protect your stuff, I think this card
That,
should be considered,
that's a
especially.
fair that's a fair
I mean,
point. I hadn't picked up on the fact that it was any non-land permanent, which
it's
does
any permanent. You
affect the
could
permanents
protect
in your
you
land
could
too.
protect your land as well. Especially like if someone tries to blow up your utility land, you can use it
Right.
to protect that.
Right.
Like if you have a Maze of Ith on the
Okay.
field or something.
All right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Okay.
like that. I like that. Yes, 5 or less life, but like again, you're gonna hold this card until you need to use it. You're not gonna necessarily play it
Yeah.
immediately, so your deck will probably be some sort of grindy deck anyway, or super aggressive, and everyone's life total goes down quickly.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you're not gonna throw this into a 3 color deck where it has other options for protection. That might be a bit better.
Mm,
But you could run it in like an Initian deck, right, where you're trying to just finish an opponent. You could
that's
run a
fair.
deck where you're leveraging your life with Necropotence, and you're playing an aristocrat style, and you're trying to finish the game that way.
Right.
Um,
All right.
you could play it with Pact Weapon. You could play it with a bunch of silly stuff, and it could still do something. Um, so I think people should consider this. There's a whole suite of cards I want to feature, like that is similar to this, where it's a common or uncommon that does something that I think is more relevant with the speed of the game. Now the game is getting faster, so I
Yes.
think this is one of those cards where it's like, okay, yes, it doesn't work every single time, but worst case is it's dead in your hand once, but like 1 out of 3 times isn't too bad.
No, that's
So
fair. That's fair. I will be prepared to backtrack on my opinion that like the ability to target any permanent I think would be what appeals
so
to me
like
most.
my applicability would be like if I have to save an artifact of mine,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna play this against like the green player who tries to
Yeah.
target my stuff and blow it up. Or if I'm playing against a red player who's trying to burn me out, maybe they have a Terror of the Peaks trigger and they're putting all the triggers at me. And I
Yeah.
hit down to 5 and I play this card, so now they can't all their triggers fizzle. Um, or even the blue player, if they're trying to bounce my stuff, I could
Yeah.
protect that. Or
Yeah.
black player
No, for
trying to
sure.
make me, like trying to target my stuff with the removal spell like Bitter Triumph.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
it's just something to consider. But anyway, not to digress too much. What do you got next? I see this is a card from Foundations. So
Yeah, it's
what
the
do you
card
have
from
for us?
Foundations. I think I haven't heard a lot of people talking about it, but it seems to be picking up quite a bit of traction. It appears in over 800 decks a mere 3 weeks after the set was released. And this is Lunar Insight. So Lunar Insight is 2 and a blue for a sorcery, and draw a card for each different mana value among non-land permanents you control. And
Okay.
I look at
Yeah.
this card and I'm like, okay, that's the same mana cost as Divination, same speed as Divination.
hmm
Is it better than Divination? And I have to.
So yeah. So not to cut you off, but I think let me give you the like what I think, and then we'll
Go
jump
for it.
back in. Um, so I think turn 3, like if you play a mana dork, a 2 mana artifact, and you play a 3 drop, and you play this on turn 4, you're drawing 3 cards for 3 mana. That's very good. Very good rate. You play this on turn 6, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're drawing 6 cards for 3 mana. You play this on turn 7 or 8. And like you said, you could play a spell book, you could play Lotus Petal, you could, I don't know, you could play a bunch of other stuff to kind of cheat out more value. I could see this in an artifact deck where you're trying to refill your hand, or a spell slinging deck where you're playing a bunch of cheap things and you get 3-4 cards off of it, you copy it once and you're drawing 7 or 8 cards for 3 mana. That's where I see this.
See, I'm sort of came to the same conclusion, right? Like that's like I asked myself, in what situation where am I happy with spending this sort of mana on a card and getting how much back? Because if we've established the floor is divination, and divination isn't good enough, what does this need to do in order for it to be good enough? And I think what you're talking, 3 mana, 3 cards would be enough.
This works with tokens too.
Yes, no, for sure. So
you make a token, you have a 1-drop, you have a 2-drop, you have a 3-drop, you draw 4 cards for 3 mana.
Well, for sure. It doesn't take much to dream up a scenario where you're drawing 4 to 5 cards for 3 mana, and that's really, really good. So I'm pretty in on this card. I think this card is actually really, really good. Because there's lots of good, inexpensive things to play. Tokens are zeros. You have like Sol Ring, Skull Clamp, Senses Divining Thought, Lotus Petal, Birds of Paradise. Most of Mana Dorks are all 1-drops. Then 2-drops, there's ample.
Tons of good
things. Tons of great choices.
I think the weakest deck this would be in would be like, weirdly enough, I think Simic, because you kind of cap out at 4 or 5. And a lot of your spells are very similar mana cost, for the most part. Simic is awkward with its mana cost, I feel like, because it always tries a double spell. It always tries a triple spell. Where this card seems awkward. But in a control deck, oh my god. If you're able to play this card, and like it sticks, and you're a control player, and you draw 3 cards or 4 cards, like your opponents are just like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to interact with this guy?
Well, it's going to make them have to contemplate the idea of like, do I want to counter this draw spell now, early, because they're going to slow down the snowball. Because it wouldn't take much to bring the spell back. There's so many ways to Snapcaster it or mission briefing or whatever you do to get spells back and target this a second time. Like you're gonna get so much value. Like it's going in Drownu for me. Like I was going in my Drownu deck, which is looking flat. And I feel zero remorse for this.
Partners, man. You could draw at least 2 cards with those partners if you have 2 partners with different mana costs. A lot of people end up playing like a 5 mana or a 3 mana one and like a cheap one.
Well, you're playing Rograk plus a friend, and you've got free commander in your command zone all the time.
I mean, even that annoying Breaches and Malcolm pairing, you draw at least 2 cards. The treasures, you're probably only paying 1 mana for this card most of the time.
This is good. So
okay,
and then put it in Quasar or Nekusar or Alania, the Divergent Storm, and like you got some funny stuff going on there.
For real.
And those are lots of different color combinations there that you're going to get lots of good value out of. So there's lots of great places for this to go. There's a reason it's been in 1800. It's already in 1800X in 3 weeks, and it's going to go in a lot more. So I think right now it's costing what 26 or 30 cents or whatever. Like people should be looking to see if they can snag a couple more copies and tuck them away for later.
Alrighty, the next one I wanna see what you think about this piece of jank. This is from Mirrodin.
This one, okay, yeah.
This is Thought Prison, 5 mana. I picked this up today as a joke. I want to see if it works. When Thought Prison enters, you may have target player reveal their hand. If you do, choose a non-land card from it and exile that card. Whenever a player casts a spell that shares a color or mana value with the exiled card, Thought Prison deals 2 damage to that player.
Wow. Okay. So, the first part is 5 mana Thought sees somebody take something out of their hand. And the second half of it is if they play a card that shares a card type or same color, they eat damage. Now, if it's same type and same color, do they eat 4?
No, it says if they cast a spell they cast a spell that shares a color or mana
Or mana
value
value. Okay.
with the exiled card. It deals 2 damage to that player.
So, but it's an or clause, not or and or. Okay.
Yep.
So I like the second half of this effect a fair amount, because I do think Punisher effects like this take a pretty heavy toll in a game of Commander, because it'll sit there passively and will not draw a lot of hate because, oh, really, how much damage are people going to take? And they don't want to spend their precious artifact removal on this. I like the first half, but I feel like the 5 mana for a Thoughtseize effect is really expensive. So I would want to have this in like a deck that is in probably an artifact heavy deck that generates a lot of mana. So like maybe something like an Urza deck, or something that has got a high quotient of like artifact mana, because you're going to asking yourself to do 5 mana to do nothing to impact the board in 2024 is a bit difficult for me to digest. And I think that's my own preconceived understanding of what I think the format is doing and how powerful people are coming to the table with their decks. And, you know, precons from even 5 years ago don't come to the table with the same power level as precons today. And if that's the floor for what a new player or a deck should be able to do, then, you know, my 5 mana spell has got to do better to keep up at the table with even a precon. So I like it, but I want to be able to be sure that I can do this and do something else that's going to impact the board to make sure that this is going to slow my opponents down enough to get a purchase. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that makes sense. What I'm thinking about are twofold. Yeah. One is this would pair really nicely with Talion the Kindly Lord, because you choose a number with him, and then you choose a different number with this card, and then you draw a bunch of cards, and they take life, and then for the Thought Prism, they're also taking damage that way. The other one is you can reveal your own card, put it under the imprinted artifact, and make it so everybody takes damage for some reason. You could play like a 2 mana card underneath, or 3 mana card if you have no options for your opponents. And then if, say, you had like a bunch of damage doublers in red or something, and they're taking like 3 or 6 damage instead, there's a way where you'll make them get punished for that. Or if there's a particular greedy player out there that's playing a lot of cheap, efficient things because they think they're playing CDH at your casual pod, you can make them suffer a bit, kind of like Magnetic Mine against those treasure players, you know?
Yeah.
And you can kind of meme them out of the game. And I think that might be kind of a neat way to garner some favor with the other players.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Let's imagine. Okay, give me a second. I want to make sure I get this right. Because okay, let's imagine you've exiled a 2 mana blue card from somebody's hand. Sure. Let's say they're a storm deck, and
they're dead.
They go for they. Well, does this hit the storm cards? So like, if they try and brain freeze with a bunch of with a bunch of things, with a storm count of 8, does it recast it or does it copy it? Does that matter?
So storm is a copy effect. This just says when a player casts a spell that shares a color. Okay. So like, if it says you're casting any number without paying their mana cost or something, they would still take the damage. If they cast a ton of blue spells, they would take the damage, right?
Right.
Or if they cast a bunch of 2 mana things, they would take the damage. It's funny because it hits you too. But
yeah.
I just think it's an interesting Punisher effect, especially if you're slowing down the game a little bit. Like maybe you're preventing it so like only people can cast this one spell a turn, or something like that. I'm not sure how it interacts if you make it so things are free. But it's particular to its mana value.
It's a fascinating little card that I think I'm very keen to see you put it to use. I think your inclination of putting it in a stacks deck is probably where it should go. I think this is a stacks deck, and you just you slow everybody down, and then you start. Use this as just one more way to destroy their hand, and make it essentially untenable for them to sustain pressure, and then this starts to whittle away at their life total, and then you stick them with something else, and then Underworld Dreams, and then this is to me is like a really potent little dirty trick that someone's going to be really keen to play. So
I'm thinking about this with like the extravagant replication card, the 6-mana enchantment that just got reprinted in Foundations.
Copies of this,
and you just keep pooping out copies every upkeep, so it like kind of prevents it. It kind of makes it so there's a clock for everyone, and I think that would be neat. Or on the flip side, you're playing like something in white, and you're just trying to slow down people so you can kind of stay in the game, or you're trying to get ahead of your opponents. So you could play it against all 3 green players, and exile a 3-mana card so their cultivates make them take damage, or their borrows make them take damage. Or like if you know the kind of cards your friends play, you could really mess with them. Like if you know that there's a guy with a play pattern where he plays all 2-mana creatures, he's playing like weenies or something. There's a chance that might be applicable. But yeah, not to get into the weeds too much. I mean, this is definitely a card that I want to see and try once and see what happens.
I think it's got some neat potential. Yeah. I like it.
And you got one that actually my friend mentioned to me this week. So what's the last one?
Okay. So this last one comes from once upon a time, I had a 5-color Enchantress deck. Mm-hmm. And there aren't a lot of 5-color Enchantress decks. Like there's Go Shintai, but isn't really an Enchantress deck because it's shrines. And then there's Tom the Bomb Bombadil, he's really a saga deck. But you don't really have a true Enchantress except for this one. And this is, if you want to play 5-color Enchantress, Marina Vendrell is actually, I think, a really compelling reason to do this. So let's read Marina here. So when Marina Vendrell enters, reveal the top 7 cards of your library. Put all enchantment cards from among them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And she has a tap ability of lock or unlock a door of a target room you control. So clearly she was designed to go with rooms.
So my sort of 2 cents is even if you hit only like 2 or 3 cards, it's still pretty solid. And like even if it's killed and you have to recast it, the second clause, just ignore that because that's not relevant.
Yep.
There's maybe a few rooms that are applicable, like the 6-mana Rise of the Dark Realms one, or the there's a few other interesting ones that are in some commander decks, but like commander precons. But other than that, just ignore that. But the 7, it's like potentially a draw 7, especially if you make it so everything in your deck is an enchantment. It hits Urza Saga.
Drawing 7. Could you imagine drawing 7?
I mean, it hits Urza Saga too, which is pretty solid. It hits a lot of those 1 and 2 drop like ramp spells. It hits Sithis. It like a lot of the creatures, the enduring cycle that they just created. It hits that. Flickering this, or killing it and reanimating it, or like a bunch of other things you can do with it that'll just spam value. So my friend was talking about this, and he goes, this card's actually a lot more interesting than most 5-color enchantment cards because it's like sort of like a fact or fiction in a sense that you're getting that advantage. I think it's too slow personally, but I'm curious to see what you're thinking for this.
Well, so I mean, my 5-color Enchantress deck was helmed by Golos, and
that's hilarious.
Which is challenging. Because what ended up happening, it was looking to cheat really big and really expensive like enchantments and sagas onto the battlefield with Golos' ability. Now, the superstructure of the deck, the shell remains, and so I can keep the shell, But what I obviously have to put in, it needs to be tinkered with, because if I'm going to run Marina, I cannot play all the 5, 6, 7, 8 mana spells that are enchantments that are hidden in the deck, because I'm never going to get a way to cheat them into play with Marina. But I am going to get to find lots of impactful things to put into play, and there's enough other support floating around that you can keep the flow of cards going all the time. And I think one of the problems that Enchantress decks run into regularly is that because they're so frequently predicated on being white and green, that they sometimes get their wheels going and have no way to finish their opponents because they've got no bite. And I think because with Marina, you get access to the other 3 colors, that your deck's going to have a little bit more ability to close out and put people to sleep instead of just spinning your wheels endlessly, drawing cards by playing more enchantments, which tends to be what happens with enchantment decks.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of value. I think this will just start you to get to that train of value. Even if you're putting a bunch of dead cards on the bottom and you do whiff and it might feel bad, at least you got those cards out from hand. The only, I guess, downside is removal. How do you play around that so that you're able to actually get your removal when you need it?
Yes.
So that's the only downside of this card. In terms of, like, for Commander, it might be a bit too slow, and it might, personally for me, whiff more than it actually hits. But I guess time will tell, and if you build it, I would love to see it in action and just see what you do with it. Because the last 5-color deck you made was a lot of fun.
I haven't played that one too frequently, but yeah. So
the Rukamel one, the Rukamel.
Yeah, the Rukamel is still alive and kicking. I haven't broken it out too frequently. Yeah. So like the Golos deck, I still have it. It's still intact. I just haven't. It's sort of been in purgatory because you can't really play Golos. So I think it's going to be worth exploring and tinkering with it to try and get it back up to speed now with Marina at the helm instead of Golos.
Yeah, so take a gander, take a shot at it, and
yeah.
I got one more card for you. Okay.
Okay.
So this is from the Duskmourn House of Horror Commander set. Because I guess you did one Commander, I did one now.
Yeah.
This is Kianne, Corrupted Memory. It's 2 colorless, a green and blue. It's an illusion. As long as Kianne's power is even, you may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. As long as its power is odd, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Kianne. So what do you think about this one?
I will admit I like this card an awful lot. This thing feels kind of broken. So it's, to me, I read this as being, okay, this is my Leyline of Anticipation, and it is the 3rd mode on Wizard's class that dumps counters onto things all on one card. And if you're playing Simic, you are going to be like, you can control when you cast things, so you put more counters on it for your non-creature spells, and then subsequently when you want to put counters on it to play creatures, and all the while like putting counters on things and going nuts. Like, I think this is going to be this is a really interesting card, and I really like it. I think the interesting piece here is the tension that is created by if you're looking to fire off a bunch of spells at instant speed, how do you make sure that she doesn't tick up? Because the next time you draw a card is going to ticking up, and can you like maximize? Anyway, I just think the tension of it is really interesting. I think the power level of it is potentially really, really, really high, and then like it's like build a bomb as she builds up a bunch of counters on her, and then you just wreck somebody. So I really like Kianne. I think she's really exciting, and I think it's a kind of a neat, fun build in Simic, because Simic is prone to doing all the things that thing wants to do easily.
I think there's some potential. There's 2 cards that I really think pair nicely with this. Not very original, but very, very cool. So there's Lord of the Unreal, which gives illusion creatures you control +1/+1 and hexproof. And then there's Min Wily Illusionist. This one's really, really good. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token. With this creature gets +1/+0 for each other illusion you control. Whenever an illusion you control dies, you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to its power from your hand onto the battlefield. So you get Kianne big, they kill it. Min triggers, you put out your Omniscience or whatever silly permanent you want to play.
Oh boy.
And there's a ton of and like imagine, because it starts out non-creature spells are basically
counter spells,
right? But also Kianne starts as a 2/2, right? So you could ramp out. You could ramp out and flash out a Cultivate on turn 5, realistically.
Yeah.
Because it'll be a 3/3. You know?
Yeah.
So like turn 4 you play it, turn 5 you draw your card, you pass your turn. You hold up your sorcery speed ramp. And then people will have to figure this out. I mean, you play Urban Evolution. You could flash out an Urban Evolution, draw 3 cards, make this a 7/7 or an 8/8 or whatever. Right? Urban Evolution is kind of a bad card, but in this deck it's fantastic. And that's why we like these types of cards, because they breathe new life into cards that are kind of garbage. But this card with Kianne is like actually fantastic.
And other things that play along with it are like wheel effects play really well with this, which is kind of like a dirty way of doing this. There's a couple of blue creatures from the mystery box too that have a neat effect. Where were they? I don't have to find them. I'm kind of annoyed right now, but they are. They are like things when they die, you end up putting cards back on the top of your library and the back of your bottom of your deck and draw that many cards and things like that. So there's a lot of really neat effects and like loopy stuff you can get into with this, and it's like kind of neat.
All of the sorcery, all of the sorcery sort of cards where, like Sleight of Hand, or like the 3 mana compulsive research, like stuff like that, where you can draw 3 cards basically at instant speed, discard a card or whatever. I think there's a lot of potential here to just go ballistic, like to just straight up make a huge army of things, or make her really big, and then you could even greater good, like you could like flash in a big expensive creature and then greater good it and draw a bunch of cards, like that Mind Shrieker card from Duskmourn. That's a 10/1. You could like sack that to greater good, draw 10 cards, make that a commander lethal, swing for the
goodness,
stuff like that.
You're talking like all the things I like to do with a greater good. Draw cards, make things big, and then wreck people.
Yeah, so I think that'll be fun. The Mind Skinner, that's the card I'm thinking of.
The Mind Skinner, yeah. And there's a bunch of other effects that go along with it. Like the cards that will play really nicely with her, like Onerophage, which is like a 4 mana 1/1 that like every time you draw a card, put a counter on it. There's one in Foundations that's like some sort of bird that does the same thing. So you have a lot of this redundant effect that you can start putting in your deck, and you can do a bunch of silly things. And then you can like create loops where you shuffle things, and then of course you can like Narset and wheel the tables. And anyway,
this card puts your opponents on a clock, and then stuff like Simic Ascendancy is very dangerous. Hard to stop in its own right, but then with this, it's like kind of like it's like you're dismantling a bomb. Like the whole table's trying to figure out how to dismantle the bomb, and have to work together to solve that problem. But yeah, I'm just surprised there was no restriction, like it was like less than its power or something. But it literally doesn't matter. Its power doesn't matter at all. It's just a matter of if it's even or odd. So
yeah. It is super good, and I like that. I really like this one. I already went and bought a copy for one of my other decks, because I think it is super interesting, and it's kind of a really neat take on like the Veldalkin Orrery Leland Anticipation effect, but like also creates an interesting gameplay dynamic and tension to it. So I really like the card. I'm glad you brought it up tonight because I think it's really a really neat card to talk about and play.
Yeah, so we're gonna wrap it up for this episode, but let's. Yeah, I mean, we're still exploring how we want to continue, but I think moving forward, we're gonna have different little sub themes, different particular types of cards you want to feature, especially cards that we think are overplayed and underplayed, and then cards that are just out off the wall. So hopefully everybody you enjoyed it, and take care. We'll see you next week.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good one.